So I'm going to be sharing a little bit with you about the outcomes of some research. I'm not going to share with you the content or the process, but just some of the things that were learned working with a group of very experienced teacher educators and other leaders on their experience of learning leadership. So the first thing that came out of the conversations with these leaders is that there were four clear kinds of learning that they were doing. And when we processed the data, it came out that two of the kinds of learning we could best capture as ocean learning and two kinds as land learning. This metaphor worked for us because the ocean learning were learning in areas that changed, that like the currents would come in and go out, the tides would come, the wind would blow. It wasn't learning that stayed put. And it was very different from the more traditional learning that was more constructivist. We learn and we add to and we reformulate. So these four quadrants emerged out of the data. And the two quadrants on the bottom came out as knowledge and skills. And these are really very typical of what we imagine learning to be about. In knowledge, we're gaining more information, we're adding to it, we're building it in new and different ways. And in skills, we're learning how to do something and do it better or do it with more complexity. The thing that really stood out about these two kinds of learning is that they're really easy to measure and they're bounded. We know whether we learned it or not. We know whether we can do it or not. And so within the higher ed world, almost all the learning that was happening could be said to land in those two quadrants. But the important learning in the research among these leaders really didn't land in those two places at all. In fact, the knowledge that they had and the skills that they brought to their work got in the way of the kind of learning they needed to do. So the learning they needed to do was in these two areas of awareness, what we're calling in this work, awareness and stance. Awareness is an area that's gained a lot of interest recently. A lot of people talk about it as mindfulness. Another way of thinking about it, rather than awareness, is attention. Where is it that you're placing your attention? What are you focusing on as you work with someone? So with these leaders and teacher educators, one outcome of looking at their practice was realizing that their attention was often not in the place where the person they were working with or the group they were leading had their attention. The teachers or the leader's attention was often in places where their focus was, where their interest was, but not where the larger group was concerned. That was an interesting piece. The next piece was stance, and that really captures the relationship that the leader had in relation to the problem or the group or the challenge they were facing. In the world of stance, Carol Dweck's work on a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset is probably the most current popular topic that would land in this quadrant of stance. And it really captures everything from mindset to worldview. And in our model, that quadrant isn't bounded. There's no box around it. And that's because it's very hard to know. So much of it is unconscious. It's certainly influenced by culture. It's influenced by family over religion. And it determines a lot of where you place your awareness. So when you're moving into a world of teaching and teaching teachers or leading departments and groups, you're going to be leading out of a particular stance. And in the research that we did, the big learning that experienced teachers had to do with their awareness and their stance and how those changed in relation to becoming attuned with the people they were working with, whether they were practicing teaching or leading a department. And of course, it's important to notice that we can break out these four quadrants as a way of going more deeply, but they all interact and connect with one another. What your stance is will determine where your awareness is focused. What awareness you have is going to determine what kind of things you learn about and add to your knowledge. What's important to you in your knowledge is going to determine what skills you think you need to develop. So all of these flow, and I don't want to suggest that they are independent and separate boxes. But using that quadrant approach helps us go a little deeper. So I want to hit on just the outcomes of our research. This is what people found was key, and we've captured them into some bullet points. If you're working with teachers, where is your attention focused? So Simone Weil has this wonderful quote that captures that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. The teacher educators found that when they were focused fully on the experience of the teacher they were working with, rather than their own interests, their own concerns about what the teacher should or shouldn't be doing, and rather stayed with where the teacher was focused, that is where they had the greatest gains in terms of teacher learning. Similarly, they responded about what it was that they were paying attention to, what were they giving feedback on. They learned that the places where they were typically giving feedback in their normal mode wasn't necessarily what the teachers needed feedback on. It wasn't where their focus was. So just to give it a simple example, if the focus was on giving instructions for an activity, that's what the teacher supervisor was focused on, how the teacher did that. That may not have been where the teacher was actually focused. They were having trouble with other parts of it. So there's so many things happening in a classroom, and particularly for a novice teacher to be learning, that it made a lot more sense for the teacher educator to find out and to stay focused and keep their attention with where the teacher learner was focusing their attention. And coming out of some of the literature review came a wonderful term, dangling data. So the feedback that we give someone, whether it's an employee on our team or a teacher that we're working with, if that feedback isn't data that's of use to them and can be incorporated into their performance, the literature calls this dangling data. It's sort of a waste of time. And a lot of our teacher educators found that much of the feedback they were used to giving, they reformulated and realized was a form of dangling data. The last piece, and it's sort of a spiritual slant, but I loved the languaging of this, being attentive to the movements of the other person's heart. I think this is a way of saying being attuned to the emotions that you're eliciting in your work with the other. And we know that an affective barrier, as soon as that rises, as those emotions rise, the ability to take in new information decreases. So as a teacher educator, becoming attuned to the movements of the heart of the person you're working with was a particularly lovely way of framing that. Those shifts in attention can shift your intention. And this is in the stance quadrant. What is it you intend to accomplish? And how do you intend to accomplish it with the person you're working with? And curiosity was the key question that came out of this. Am I working from curiosity? Am I working with the intention of serving the receiver of my feedback rather than showing my own expertise? And being attuned to whether the goal is to force a change, push a change, manipulate in some way, versus engaging in working with the person. And in this place, an attentiveness to the movements of your own heart as the person in power or the person giving feedback particularly stood out to us. And so the big question that came out of the research was, how can you be fully aware of the tensions that you're engaging in when you're working with someone? The tension between being a listener and being an expert. And often what we found was people's own level of skills and knowledge, their own expertise, got in the way of being able to be present to the person they were working with. What's the tension between guiding someone and following where they are leading you? What's the tension between understanding where they are and what they're saying and your own personal need to be understood? So these are some of the tensions that came out of our research. And we found that holding these tensions and recognizing both of them and being attuned to them was something that many of the teachers and leaders indicated became a core learning in their experience of this process. So those are the key pieces that we looked at. The place in which you're pointing your attention, where are you letting your awareness focus? Being aware of your own intention and coming back to that. Why am I here? Am I here to push this person in a new direction, or am I here to really fully experience where they are and be present to them? And then what are the tensions that arise, since sometimes these are institutional tensions in terms of the role. So those were the 3 takeaways. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.